You know, have you ever noticed that you don't miss things until they're gone? How you never knew how much you needed that right knee until it didn't work very well anymore? You have something else about your health that you always just took for granted and now it's compromised? Or you had a relationship that you thought would always be there and now it's not there anymore? Years ago, decades ago now, we hosted a Danish student in our home in Colorado, and when she came to us, it was sunny out that day, and when she first got there, she immediately needed to get out into the sunshine. And we said, Ida, it's going to be sunny tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, you know. But she was from Copenhagen, and a sunny day was not something to be blown off. You needed to take advantage of that. And we didn't realize we had 330 days of sunshine a year, and we just kind of lived in that. Now I live in Minnesota, and that's the main thing I miss about Colorado. You don't know what you have sometimes until it's gone. And guys, I just want to encourage you. Do you realize what we have here? What we have here is fellowship. We have a safe place. We have a specific environment that God has been forming over the years where men can come and fellowship. And this is not the only place. It happens in any living church. So take advantage. This is just a little exhortation, a little extra at the front end. Take advantage of the opportunities we have to be with other men, to, at least this morning, to sit around a table, but in other places to be engaged with men, all of whom profess to serve the same master, and all of whom possess spiritual gifts and abilities, and hopefully a brotherly heart to share with us. So I just want to give you that exhortation because, you know, the world, when you look out at the guys you work with today, maybe you'll just wonder, I wonder if that man has any other men in his life who are drawing him deeper into his heart and soul. And we might even get tired of that once in a while, you know. I wish you wouldn't be always talking about my heart and soul and where I'm going and all that. But how many men in our world don't have anybody that's drawing them deeper to help them look at themselves and expand their lives, and they're just a shell? We have this opportunity, so I want us to take advantage of that. And it comes up with this topic today. We're going to talk about Barnabas. Barnabas, we're talking about first responders, and Barnabas is the first to brother, to be a real brother. You know, great biblical doctrines stir us and they mobilize us and they shape our lives, but even more powerfully, when a man lives out a biblical doctrine, when he outs it in his life, when he begins to say it and model it, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's what brothers do. They help us and they model for us what it is to serve the living Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what really Ironworks is all about, and I trust will be the legacy of Ironworks, is not the teaching so much as the brotherhood that happens. And that's my hope for you, is that week in, week out, getting beneath all the sarcasm and kicking tires and griping about the Vikings and all that kind of stuff, that there really is a brotherhood that's forming, that we know some other men and they know us, and we're able to help each other. And we're here to find that brother. I can't think of a better scene than what was portrayed in the movie 42, when I think they were in Cincinnati, and Jackie Robinson was a new Major League Baseball player, and they were hurling racial epithets from the stands, and you might remember this scene.
They can say all they want. We're just here to play ball.
It's just a bunch of crackpots still fighting the Civil War.
Well, hell, we'd have won that son of a gun if the cornstalks would have held out. We just ran out of ammunition.
Better luck next time, Pee Wee.
Ain't gonna be it next time, Jackson. All we got's right here. Thank you, Jackson.
What are you thanking me for?
I got family up there from Louisville. I need them to know. I need them to know who I am.
Hey, number one! You playing ball or socializing?
Playing ball, up.
Come on! Don't let us get to you!
Playing ball. Maybe tomorrow we'll all wear 42. That way they won't tell us apart.
Let's close in prayer. Isn't that a great scene? Pee Wee Reese put his reputation, literally his reputation, on the line to be a brother. And that's what we want to talk about this morning. This is exactly what happened with the man named Barnabas in the New Testament. Another man that I want to meet when I get to heaven. And we're introduced to him in Acts chapter 4. I want to just go over some things about what we know about him in the Scripture so that we can then springboard off of that and think about our own lives and our own brothering of other men. But starting in Acts chapter 4, verse 34, it says, this is the early church in Jerusalem. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. We meet Barnabas as a wayfarer. He's traveling. He's come to Jerusalem from Cyprus, and we meet him as a generous man. And he must have owned a local field because he sold it and he brought the money immediately and gave it away. He saw a need and he filled it. He was free of materialism, and we meet him as this man who has this big heart and a magnanimous spirit to give away this so that the church can thrive. In chapter 9 of the book of Acts, we meet Saul, who is struck down on the road to Damascus and blinded, and the Holy Spirit comes to him, and he gives his life and his heart to Jesus Christ, and he's saved. And the quest goes out, well, who will go and meet Osama bin Saul? This guy who was a terrorist against Christians, who will go and brother him? And they go, Barnabas will do that. Let's get Barnabas to do that. And Barnabas is the guy who goes and brothers with Paul and brings him, according to Barnabas' own reputation, he brings him to the disciples and commends him to the church. Uses his reputation to build a foundation under someone that nobody trusted. And Barnabas said, I stand with him. Just like Pee Wee Reese stood with Jackie Robinson. In chapter 11, there's a revival that breaks out amongst Greeks. All the church had been involved with up until now had been Jews, which sounds odd to us today. But 400 miles north of Jerusalem in Antioch, a revival breaks out amongst Greeks, and they come to Christ. And they're not sure. They're hearing about this in Jerusalem, and they want to know, is this real? What's going on up there? Who are you going to send? We send Barnabas. He's a man of discernment. We trust him. He will go. He will discern, is this real? And so Barnabas takes the assignment, and he goes to Antioch. And when he gets to Antioch, he says, you know what? I know the man that this church needs, this young group of new believers needs. And he goes to Tarsus, and he picks up Saul, now named Paul, and says, this is the guy I need, the Lord needs in Antioch. And he introduces Paul to Antioch. In chapter 13 of the book of Acts, they're praying about what the Lord wants them to do. And the Lord convinces them that they need to send out missionaries to the far ends of the earth. And who do they send? Barnabas. Let's send Barnabas. This guy is ever ready. He's always ready to go and take on a new assignment. And so they go, and they start their first missionary journey, and it's Barnabas and Saul. We need hundreds of men like Barnabas, who are not only leaders, not only shepherds, not only servants, but they are leader makers. Now, we can't always deliberately set out and say, I'm going to be a brother to this man and I'm going to make him a leader. Now, Barnabas didn't know that either. But think of the two men that he invested his life in that we know about in the New Testament. He invested himself in Paul, and he invested himself later in John Mark. Both men who were outcasts, men who were rejected in some way. Barnabas went beside them, brothered them, and we don't know that Barnabas ever wrote a word, and we certainly know that he didn't write any word of Scripture. But Paul, whom he discipled, whom he brothered, wrote a third of the New Testament, 13 epistles. And, of course, John Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark. So we have about half the New Testament that comes from the seeds sown and the words used by a man named Barnabas. Are you a Barnabas? Could you be a Barnabas? Don't rule yourself out. You can be a Barnabas to somebody. You might not know it in this life. You might not know it for 20 or 30 years, but you can be that person for some other man. And there may be a man in your life who is that Barnabas to you today. We know in chapter 13 of the book of Acts that they started out as the missionary journey called Barnabas and Saul. But by verse 13 of chapter 13, it's now Paul and his companions. Barnabas didn't get the headlines. Barnabas was a tag-along, at least in the biblical text, certainly not in the mission itself. And later in chapter 15, remember, Paul and Barnabas have a dispute over a young man named John Mark. John Mark had dropped out of the first trip, and Barnabas wanted to take him on the second trip. And Paul said, no way, I'm not taking a laggard with me, And so Barnabas and Paul split, and Barnabas took John Mark. And it's obvious the effect that he had as he brothered with a young man and brought him back to usefulness. About, it's 9 years ago or so, my wife gave me the perfect gift for my 60th birthday. And she gave me a week at a cattle ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was City Slickers 2. And so I went out there, and it was a beautiful place. It was 7,000 feet and out in the aspen, and it was in late June. It snowed 3 days that I was there, by the way. And I rode a horse for 40 hours in 5 days. And I'm not a horseman, so that was a challenge. That's why I don't walk straight today. But we actually did actual work. We teamed up every morning. We would get up at 4:30. We would trailer the horses. And we would go out to a rancher's spread, and it was in time when they were taking the cattle that had just birthed these calves, and we were driving them up to the BLM land up high for the high pasture. So we would drive them, 10 or 12 miles a day, and there were some people who actually knew what they were doing, but we learned some things. So we were driving these cattle, and one day we drove them up. We drove this huge herd, about 400 cattle, right up the highway. And then through a gate, and we went up into this high pasture. And we finally got into the high pasture, and it was this cacophony of noise, all these bawling cattle. And the cowboys that were with us said, now watch these mamas mother up. Because the calves were bawling, and the reason they're bawling is they got separated from their mama. And it was amazing, after about 15 minutes, it just quieted down. And I loved the phrase that they said, these calves mothered up. They found each other. They mothered up with the one they wanted. So I want to use that phrase and say, you need to brother up. You need to brother up. Now, you can't just do that automatically, but you need to have that on your radar, and you need to treasure and value a brother. I don't have biological brothers, but I've got dozens of real brothers. And I have brothers I can go to for specific things, and brothers that I've had in the past that are no longer in my life, but they're still as valuable to me. And I know God has future brothers that are going to come alongside. And I want to be that kind of person as well. Barnabas is a first responder because he was always the first to brother up with somebody else. When you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand, shall we sing it? You know, you've got a friend. So let me just talk about a couple of things that are content for us today. True friends are few. True friends are few. That doesn't mean you need to be exclusive. It just means that when you whittle it all down, there really aren't many. We're not looking for 50 of your best friends. We're looking for one or two in your life. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother, in Proverbs 18:24. There are levels of friendship. There are work associates, you know, people with skills that we call upon and we get to know them and we develop a comfort zone. There are leisure friends, which, you know, we just, they're acquaintances that we know from sitting next to them at a game or whatever. There are buddies where we share hobbies and interests, and that's good. And then there are friends that we would invite along into our ice house to go ice fishing, or, you know, we would take them on a trip with us. And then there's a brother. There's a brother that we would allow to borrow our boat. Whatever that lied. When I first moved to Minnesota, one of the brothers here on staff said, you know, now you need to understand something, Roger. Don't ever ask anybody to borrow his boat. He might offer it to you, but don't ask, because that's like, you know, that's like a bridge too far. So, will you loan me your boat? No. But look at this little diagram. It's just a diagram, but if you look at this upside down triangle, and you look at the top of this, and it talks about levels of intimacy, really levels of relationship. We have a certain level at the level of facts. And then as we go deeper, we begin to share our opinions, which is freely done around these tables at Ironworks. But we could almost draw a water line across there, and where we really need to go if we're going to develop friendships, and especially brotherhood, is we need to go beneath the water line and begin to share our emotions. Not that we're emotional, but we need to be able to share what's going on in our heart and our mind about what's happening. We begin to share our emotion, and this is true about marriage as well. And then the deepest level here is that of transparency, where we have no boundary between who we are. And this is shared. And if you look at this triangle upside down, what it represents is the number of people who can get to this level of transparency in your life are very few, perhaps just one. And that's a treasure to have that person. Many, many acquaintances, but maybe one or two or three who can really know your heart. Because it takes time to get there. And then you notice this arrow for trust. That doesn't mean trust is going down. What it means is trust is going deeper. As trust goes deeper, we are more able to share and be more transparent with one another. True friends are few. So here are some ways to enhance a deeper friendship. First of all, it's telling your story, your humanity. You get to do that a little bit every week at Ironworks. You get to share a little bit about your story. And I hear this all the time, third hand. You know, guys are talking to me and say, you know, somebody at my table at Ironworks said such and such, or I'm still remembering what he said about that, about some experience. Your story has power. Now, the problem is we don't get to share much of our story here, and so that's why road trips are so good. That's why being as regular as you can at Ironworks helps, because you pick up more and more of the story. That's why campfires are so good, is we sit around, we poke the fire, we begin to talk about our lives, and that's why crises bring out many, many good things about brotherhood. Even though the crisis may be difficult, we share a piece of our story. Story is a huge part of it. It's about your humanity. Then we can talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability is reciprocal. We need to, you know, if one person is vulnerable and the other one is not, then we don't create brotherhood, but we need to get beneath our self-sufficiency and be willing to say, here's a need in my life. Here's a gap I have. Here's something where I need help. True friendship needs to include intentionality. And I would say, in parenthesis, this is the word love. Now, you might not use the word. It's hard to say to another man, I love you. There's a few men in my life I can say that comfortably with. I mean it to a lot of guys, but they wouldn't receive it very well. But intentionality is love put into practice. It's directional. It says, I'm moving toward you. And intentionality is basically getting beyond the fear of being open with each other to saying, you know what, I need you. And I can see that actually you need me right now. It's intentional. And then there's brokenness, and this is where we need grace. You know, who of us has lived a perfect life? Not one of us can come here and say, I'm sinless and perfect. Not one of us can say, I don't have any bumps in my life. There's been no speed bumps, no failures. All of us have something that we're hiding. And when we get to that true brokenness, which again is shared with very few, and we get past our invulnerability and our pride, that's where brotherhood really begins to grow. And so this is a recipe, but you know, a recipe when my wife makes bread and she puts freshly ground wheat and yeast and water and eggs and whatever she does in that bowl, it's just a recipe, but when she cooks it, it comes out completely different than all the separate ingredients. And that's the magic, that's the beauty of brotherhood. And if you have it, go deeper. And if you've had it in the past, you know that's what you long for. And this is what really Ironworks exists for, is to create this kind of brotherhood. And that's why the military incubates brotherhood. Because they take you to boot camp, strip you naked, take away all your race and class and invincibility. They make you feel small on purpose. I'm not recommending this necessarily. They take away all your privacy, and then they put you into battle that makes you desperately want each other, and it creates brotherhood. And so brothers who have been to battle come back together 40 years later, having never seen each other since, and they have that commonality. And that's what we desire in a true brother. I want to just say, though, that it's seasonal. I was talking about this the other day with a couple of brothers, and they said, yeah, you know, that brother that sustained me back in my 30s, I don't even know where he is today. You know, that's going to happen. But God provides. And it's seasonal. I know some people who've encouraged me in difficult places in my life, and it's kind of like I don't know where they came from and I don't know where they went. But they brothered me for a while and made a huge difference in my life. So true friends are few, and let's look at this one. Few friends are true. Anybody know what this is? It's a small version. It's called a scraper. Before there was sandpaper, you used to be able to put a fine finish on wood with a scraper. It's a flat edge, but it's got a little microscopic curl on it, and when it's sharp, you can draw it across a piece of wood, and you can shave a little shaving of wood off there like it comes across hot butter. It's a wonderful tool. I never knew what a scraper was until my friend Bob in Colorado, who's a fine woodworker, gave me this little scraper. And I used it for a while, but he said, you know, you can't just use this. You've got to burnish it. And I said, what is that? So he gave me a burnisher. This is hard steel. And before you use this scraper, you burnish the edge. So you recreate that microscopic curl on one side, so when you pull it across the wood, it shaves it. I thought I knew how to do woodworking till I met Bob. And he taught me all this kind of stuff. How do you burnish the edge? Iron, sharpening, iron. To do something that no other tool can really do as adequately. Few friends are true. You need a friend who will burnish your edge and keep you sharp. When you're not sharp, what are you? D-U-L-L. And life exists to make us dull. Work and commuting and pressure and money and kids and grandchildren and physical problems and financial pressures all dull us down. They make us into workhorses when we're meant to be racehorses. And we need a friend who burnishes that edge to keep us from growing dull. So here's what a true friend will do. A brother won't let me play small. A brother won't let me play small. Playing small is shrinking into your silo of competency. It's only doing the things that you know how to do well. It's becoming more and more specialized and isolated and risk-averse and apathetic and safe. A friend won't let you do that. A friend smacks you up beside the head and said, come on. You can do better than that. A friend encourages. A friend admonishes. He's intentional about pressing on to maturity. Here's a few quotes I just picked out. Until we all attain to mature manhood. That's what a brother does. He wants that for you. You want that for him. Another partial quote. But as for you, O man of God. This is Paul writing to Timothy. Saying, here's the way the world is going. Here's what everybody's settling for. Here's the easy path. But as for you, God has bigger plans for you. As for you, O man of God. And then he says to Timothy, do your best to present yourself as a workman who doesn't need to be ashamed. I need a brother in my life who won't let me settle, who won't let me just go flaccid and limp, but who's pulling me forward. And it's not always a Vince Lombardi sort of kick in the tail. It's just somebody who's moving himself and somebody saying, come along with me, who's encouraging me. But once in a while, there's a brother who says, come on. I'm seeing this in you, and I think you can do better. It's a mutual conspiracy toward maturity instead of a mutual conspiracy toward mediocrity. And a brother draws me out and does not let me play small. A couple of seasons ago, we did a series called Imitate Me. Remember that one? I don't either. But go back, it's on the web. That's why we have the web. But we did 8 different things that, as character qualities that as a man, could we say, imitate me. It's not pride. It's just that I'm trying to advance in these character qualities, and I want you to come along with me. Don't play small. Don't just get stuck in your silo of competency. I just started doing CrossFit, and because I felt like I need to work on my core, and boy, did I need to work on my core. Every time I go, I'm exposed for who I am. I told my wife, going to CrossFit is like hearing a good sermon. You thought you were doing pretty well? And now it really hurts. But don't let each other play small. Secondly, a brother loves enough to confront. And I simply mean here, enough to coach. It doesn't mean that one guy has the higher ground and he's almighty and he points the finger of shame at you. That's not what confrontation is. Confrontation is mentoring, it's coaching, it's teaching, it's risking comfort for the sake of the truth. I like to think of it as holding up a mirror. Can I hold up a mirror to you right now? And it's not just about actual evil, although that needs to take place in our lives, but it's also about tone. It's about priorities. It's about direction. Or it's about selfishness. Or it's about lukewarmness. A brother loves enough to confront, risking the comfortable for the sake of the truth. And it's also very encouraging. It's also about using your gift. A brother reflects to you what you bring to the game. I'm in a Bible study with a bunch of guys on Tuesday morning, and we're at the place where we're talking about spiritual gifts. And so I gave them this phrase. I think I've said it here many times before as well. Because we're all saying, well, what is my gift? What are my talents? What do I bring to the game? So here's a phrase that I used to have on the glass of my desk as I was a young pastor and really struggling with who am I and what do I bring to the game? And here's the phrase. When you search for yourself, you'll probably find nothing. Not because there's nothing to find, but because you don't know where to look. Your only hope is to give yourself away in love and let others tell you what you had to give. That's been a motto of my life. I wouldn't know who I was if someone hadn't reflected back. That's what a brother does. A brother cuts beneath the sarcasm, beneath the buddy-buddy, and once in a while puts his arm around your shoulder and says, brother, this is what you give to me. This is what you bring. Thank you for what you did. You know why we need to do that? Is because when we have a strength, we don't notice it. We're like fish swimming in the water. We don't even know we're wet. And so when we reflect it to a brother, what that does is it evokes from him a recognition that God is using me. And that's encouraging. And there's nothing like encouragement. The kisses of an enemy may be profuse, but faithful are the wounds of a friend. You might even start your next conversation with, I need to wound you. But no, maybe I need to encourage you. This is what you bring to the game. Thirdly, a brother sticks when things come unglued. Paul was deserted by many, Demas and Alexander, several others, but he was refreshed by guys with unpronounceable names like Onesiphorus and other guys like Timothy and Luke and Silas. And if you read the last chapter of Romans, he's just filled with names of people that encouraged him. A brother sticks when things come unglued. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. When I was a young pastor, I had pastored for 6 years after seminary in a church that was exploding in growth, and it was an exciting place to be. And I was pastoring 2 congregations, and the senior pastor was pastoring 2, and I was 32 years old, and I was called to a church across town, sent with about 40 other people to a church that had been in decline for 20 years. It was had been a prosperous church, but had shrunk to about 175 people. And I was 32 years old, and it was a sea of white hair, kind of like Ironworks. No. No, it wasn't. And I went there, and God really started a renewal in that church. And in my first year there, we didn't have many resources, so I hired a part-time youth pastor, and he was tall, Scandinavian, talented, handsome, had all the qualities. And Don began his ministry in our church. This church hadn't had a youth group for about a decade. And suddenly we had all these young people, junior hires and senior hires in our church. And after Don had served with us for a while, one of the secretaries came to me very sheepishly one day and said, I hesitate to say this, but some of the things that Don is saying just don't stack up. He doesn't do what he says he's going to do. He hasn't done what he said he already did. He's causing some real problems for us in the office because we're constantly trying to have him cover his bases for him. We're finding some money that's not being accounted for, different things like that. And I said, okay, I'll talk to him about it. And he said, yeah, I'll straighten up. I'm just disorganized, blah, blah, blah. Well, then a couple months later, one of his volunteer staff came to me and he said, I'm resigning because Don is not telling the truth about a lot of things. And he said, I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to resign from serving. And I said, well, I'm sorry you have to do that, but that's the way it is. Well, the same guy came back to me a month later, and he said, Roger, Don is a pathological liar. And he said, it takes one to know one. and I am one. I have been one. And he said, if you have the courage to check it out, you will find that nothing he says stacks up. And he said, I'm just going to leave that with you. I said, oh, thanks a lot. So here I am in a church that's struggling to revive itself, or God to revive this church, and we finally have a youth group, and now we have a guy that is really suspect. So we began to investigate. He was receiving a scholarship to go to seminary from a church in another city, and we found out that he was getting the scholarship, but he wasn't going to seminary. He told me many times what he was learning in class and all this baloney. He was secretly dating one of the senior girls. There were just lots of money stuff, and it's just he never was where he was supposed to be. He wasn't ever doing what he was supposed to be doing, but he was just charismatic, and he was covering himself. Well, we confronted him with it, with several known objective things, and we said, brother, we want you to be restored, so we're going to remove you from your position, but we want to restore you as a brother through a discipline process. And he accepted that. Lots of tears, said he would do it. About 2 weeks into this, I found out he'd gone down the street to a sister church of ours and gotten himself hired as a youth pastor. And our whole youth group followed him down there. And of course, I was just beginning to learn about HR policy and all that, but I knew we couldn't share what we were struggling with. I knew we couldn't just say to the whole church, here, Don's a liar, kind of like our politics today. We couldn't just do that. We just had to say, those things to say, well, it just wasn't the right fit, and blah, blah, those kind of things. And so the parents were up in arms because they finally had a youth group, and now the kids were all leaving, and they thought, well, who's this young pastor that's doing this to our family? And the youth were leaving our church, and first of all, I was homicidal, man. I was ready to beat him with my burnisher in a dark alley somewhere. But, I had to deal with that. I had to deal with forgiveness. But I remember a meeting we had one night when things looked so horrible because we couldn't explain to people what was happening. We were losing our youth group, and my reputation had been completely trashed. I remember standing in the dark hallway of that church after a long deacons meeting, and a brother named Gary put his hand on my shoulder, and I couldn't even see him. We were in that dark. It was that dark. He said, Roger, I'm going to walk with you through this. We're going to get through this. I've got your back. And I surfed off his faith and strength for months. I don't know what I would have done without a brother. I don't know where Gary is today in the world. I don't know where he is spiritually. I don't know where he is geographically. But God provided him for me for several years in my life as a brother. I want you to long for that. I want you to long for it because we need to brother up. And I think you do long for that. So how do you be a brother? Well, be there. Just be there. Sometimes you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. It's a crisis. But your friend, your brother will never forget that you were there. Speak the truth in love. Don't moralize. Don't try to give explanations for the disaster that just happened. I always tell people, beware of Christians bearing answers. What I'm talking about is the woulda, coulda, shoulda, or the blame, or some magical spiritual secret that you're seeing that why this is all happening. Don't moralize. Keep the faith. Point to Jesus. Point to hope. And just walk with people through it. And also do that when somebody's rejoicing, because the hardest spiritual discipline in the church is to rejoice with those who rejoice. Especially if we're not rejoicing, if we're not having a good time and somebody else is. So be like Barnabas. Be a first responder. Be the first to brother up. So let's talk about that around our tables. Let me pray for you, and we'll let you do that. Father, thank you for making us a family. calling us sons. And because we are all sons, we're all brothers. What a great thought. What a great experience. Lord, help us to enjoy that today, to savor what we have while we have it. So take us deeper, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.